Now, to simplify this as much as possible, let's go ahead and start from the S mount. So when I'm here, my knee's above the shoulder, my foot is kind of kickstand behind. When I come through, I'm electing to control and bring the two arms together as much as possible so that I'm seating my weight across my hamstring here, and I'm pretty close to the line of the shoulders to begin with. If my partner is intelligent in this position, the armbar side arm is not going to be placed on top because it gives me easy access to control and start to sit across. So generally speaking, this hand will connect to the bicep. This hand will come back in anticipation of my leg clearing the head, okay? If I can fight and there's access to it, I'll almost always elect to get elbow to elbow and pry across towards the hip. If for whatever reason I get here and I'm struggling to do that, a very common thing that I'll do is I'll grab towards my shin and I'll use this to elevate the head. In this scenario, I feel like it works a little bit better. I have the ability to weave my hand through. When I get elbow deep, I start to lean across my hip, and then I generally release and I start to come through looking to collect the wrist with my elbow. So in this scenario right here, if I don't do a good job of building him onto his side when I go to lean across and his right shoulder stays fixed to the mat, when I come through, even though I have compression on his forearm, if I step over is generally when this will happen. If I neglect to tuck my heel under his head, he can rip his elbow to the mat, and in doing so, I may fall through to my knees. In this instance, I'm going to try to measure the length of his arm with mine. Inversely, my elbow is going to go to his wrist. My wrist is going to catch towards his elbow, and I'm going to pull up on the tricep. This will give me a brief moment in time to engage my toes in the mat, and then I'm going to try to make as tight of a roll as I can, bringing my right shoulder towards my right knee, driving off of my 2 feet, and transitioning through towards an inversion. When I get here, I want to snap my heels towards the mat, and immediately I want to look to gain control over my opponent's far shoulder. And once I catch, I'm going to look to lock. And in this scenario, I may not keep my legs closed. It's hard to generate the movement to separate the arm here. So I take my leg off, I keep back heeling pressure, and I begin to escape my hips until I can get him to come flat towards the mat. And that will cause a scenario where I bring with my body his wrist towards his shoulder. Okay, so that would be the first option here that we talked about. And again, that's if the shoulders are flat to the mat. The second option is off of the exact same scenario. Nothing really changes here. I get to my S mount. My partner, we use hands pretty much the same way. So when I'm here, generally speaking, I'm connecting deep through. I'm punching a gap. I'm pulling the arm across. When I go here, I actually manage to build him up onto his side to some extent. When I step over, he pulls through. He ends up on his shoulder like so. In this scenario, if my back heel pressure was coming towards the head, and I have separation between his head and the mat, generally this is where I'm going to go to this option. I'm going to pull the tricep in towards my hip to ensure that it doesn't slip. I'm using my hand diagonally the direction that I intend to go. My fingers are facing away, so I'm pressuring towards his bottom shoulder. I begin to make a series of backpedaling motions to walk. Once I get him up on his side, I continue to pull, but I sit. As I sit, I swish my 2 heels to the same side. Generally, this will allow me to flatten my partner out. And then I'm looking for the far trap. I'm looking for wrist control if I can gain it. If you notice, my ankles are crossed so that my 2 thighs are compressing. I'm maintaining the line of his elbow. Once I get control of the far shoulder, the far wrist, then I can start to tuck and I can make an attempt to build up. My build up, I'm trying to do 2 things for a typical omoplata. I'm trying to bring my knee to the mat above the shoulder, in front of the shoulder rather, and I'm trying to take my head diagonally opposite that shoulder on the far side so that my ribs and my thigh are compressing the wrist and the forearm, and as I build height, I drive his hand towards his shoulder blade. So that's kind of the repetitive motion that you guys are looking to create to finish the omoplata. That makes sense for everybody? When you guys are going for the option where we roll through, the angle with which we try to roll in relation to his body is really important. If you guys roll parallel, your feet will kind of land in a position that's constructive. It'll help you to roll through. If I roll on an angle away from my partner, so towards my left knee when I get to this far side, what's going to happen is my heels are going to come across his shoulders, and I'm not going to clear his head every single time. So when you guys are here, let's say that we've built into the S mount, we have control of the head and the arm. Like I was saying, sometimes we're forced to leave this arm first. This isn't a bad thing because it's going to leave this arm really well isolated. But when I go to step over towards the head, when we get here, if he rips that arm out and I fall to this side, I can't roll outside of my left knee. If I do this, so let me show what this looks like. If I roll like this, my legs will catch his head and his shoulder. It's not a clean transition. He can cut the corner faster than I can. Okay, so it's imperative when you guys get to that side, you angle your body parallel with his torso to complete the motion, and then we drive through with our heels to clear the head. So again, you guys get here, you weave, go to lean. When we transition and he rips out, I turn back towards him. So if you notice, my knee is flush with his ribs. I'm seated on toward his shoulder. I align my arm with his, and then I attempt to roll really tight on this angle right here. As soon as I push off and my heels come across, I'm inverted, I snap my heels down, and I look to gain control of that far shoulder as best I can before I start to escape my hips. So the transition there has to be kind of clean on that angle. If you try to cut across, it doesn't typically work as well. It's not as fluid. So here, one more time, just to reiterate, when you guys come through on this option here, we weave, we go to transition. If he rips, I turn with him. So I don't want to be here where there's separation between my knee and his ribs. I want to be flush. I catch the tricep to ensure that I have the position. And then when I drive off of the toes, as I invert, my shoulder comes as closely to my knee as possible. I drive off and then I snap down. As I snap down, I'm looking to catch that far arm and make the angle for myself. Okay? With the other option, the option where we backpedal into it. Some of you guys try to take your knees to the mat the same way, and it becomes more difficult because you're sitting on the shoulder versus sitting on the chest. Okay? So for this scenario here, when I pummel through, I cut across, and I step over. If he's still flat on his shoulder here, and I sit through to this side, it becomes increasingly more difficult to build him back up to his shoulder. However, if when I'm right here, I have an angle where I'm already kind of coming across, his head is elevated forward from the pressure. So let's say that I came here and I maybe start to get a little separation when I go to back heel. If he manages to get his arm out here, his shoulder's already elevated. So this hand is going to catch and pull it further into my lap. He's already started to create the angle for me. I'm going to engage my toes in the mat, and I'm going to begin to walk his head up. If you notice, that back heeling pressure brings his head forward, brings him further vertical. As his shoulder starts to come over the line of his bottom shoulder, it's quite easy for me to sit and swivel my hip and my ankles out. And then, so long as I have control above the line of the elbow here, I can start to build across. I can look to control, and then I can build height with my hip. That height is what finishes the movement. So just be conscious that if you want to go to that option, you're looking to build the shoulders vertically. You don't want to compress the shoulders flat to the mat. So sit on the chest and back heel, that helps. Does that make sense for everybody?